do this. All right. Oh, welcome to our official all-class Zoom session, the very first one, other than the one we had at the launch of the term, etc. We can discuss what you have in your notes, right, regarding all the readings for the first and the second week, and what's happening right now, because we're in week 3, and we're starting to delve deep into Maxine Green's book, which Marcia and I had a little, exchange of pleasantries about the book and so on. So let's begin with just a quick check-in, and I'll be the benevolent dictator as always, and I'll call your names and go ahead and check in the group. Just talk about what's happening. Talk about where you're at with the class, with work, anything you want to share. Share as little or as much as you like. And then I won't get rolling after that. I don't have a set agenda. I never do set up solid agendas for these things because it's your forum and you should determine the trajectory in which we travel with it in relation to the work, of course, right? So let me just go around who I see on my screen from left to right to the bottom, and then we'll go from there. So Marcia, if you don't mind checking in with the group, tell us what's happening, how you doing?
Recording in progress.
Hi, everybody. Well, let's see. I got a little bit of a late start jumping in the group, but I did get the syllabi, so I was able to start reading and kind of start gathering articles and started doing a lot of diving into reading for a topic. But I'm finding out that this past week, I was talking to Dr. Kashani that once I started reading this, I read it once on accident. I didn't realize we were to read the first 2, but I went through and I read it once, and then I went back and I had to reread it again. And I found out that the second time I went through and started reading it, I realized that it was starting to take the ideas that I had in my head about pedagogy, modes of interpretation that she brought in together with this. I started remembering things from my undergrad and my master's program, and ideas that started relating and correlating to what I was actually doing in the classroom now, and where perhaps maybe a research project would lead me later. Does that make sense? There was one part in the reading this week that really resonated with me. It was early on. See if I can go to it. And it was around page 14. It was talking about the reflective practitioner. I'm going to be brief, but they talked about the reflective practitioner, and it said, quote, "A teacher in search of his or her own freedom may be the only kind of teacher who can arouse young persons to go in search of their own." And I started thinking, wow, here we are in this program together, learning, discovering, trying to figure out what that question might be that we have to be better, or to become a reflective practitioner. And it really resonated with me. And then I read on and it said, quote, "It will be argued as well that children who have been provoked to reach beyond themselves, to wonder, to imagine, to pose their own questions are the ones that are most likely to learn to learn." And I thought, wow. To me, that it summed up everything that we had already started and began reading. And, like I said, once I started thinking about that and more, and how I could bring these things that she had talked about, all these different ideas into this one big ball of critical thinking, it just started opening up all these other pathways. So then I just started diving in different directions without trying not to overwhelm myself. Oh, what does that mean? Or this is a new vocabulary term, or this is a new idea. And it just started snowballing from there. So that's what I have so far. I hope I didn't rattle.
No. Well, you gave us some pointers to think about as we check in and move forward. Thank you, Marcia. Nina, how you doing? You must be a little tired from driving.
I'm really tired. because I've just spent the last also 10 days on the road. So I haven't done much reading at all. Because I burned out at work and I was like, I want to take a vacation. And my vacation was pretty much driving for 10 days. And I learned through that that's not a vacation, people. At least not for me. Um, so yeah, I at least contributed to the class a little bit through the forums and contributed to my other class, but sitting down and reading a ton was not on the list of was checked off on able to do and get done. So at least I am here.
Yeah. It's good that you're here. You have a lot of catching up to do, but I have faith in you. I think you'll catch up. Yeah. Savannah, check in with us. What's going on?
Well, I've been working a ton. I'm a preschool teacher, so we're definitely understaffed right now. I've been working like 15-hour days. However, I've been reading our book, but something that really sticks with me is kind of those videos that you post, like TED Talks almost. And Sir Ken Robinson's was my favorite. I really enjoyed that video. I think hearing someone's voice and kind of hearing someone preach about their own opinion really sticks in my mind rather than me reading out of a book. And something that I kind of posed on the forum, like a question that I get asked so often is, I'm a pre-K teacher, so I have 4 and 5-year-olds in my classroom. Sorry, my dog is panting, you might hear her. So a lot of questions that I get from people are like, you're a pre-K teacher, you teach 4 and 5-year-olds. What do you actually teach children that are that young? And through that video that I watched, it really just kind of amplified what I do in the classroom as far as like curiosity being like kind of the engine of achievement and how I create creative curriculum for the children and how I actually do play a very important role in society. However, others may not agree with that. So I really enjoyed that video. That's kind of where I am.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Savannah. Megan?
Where to begin? So over the summer, some funky things were going on. And I've been diagnosed and misdiagnosed and then diagnosed and misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And every time they try to fix it, I'm either allergic to the medication or I have really bad reactions. So just trying to get through that in the last couple of weeks. I teach at a high school. We've been in session since April 8th. So we're going into our 5th week. I teach 3 co-taught world history classes and 3 dual enrollment classes through UNLV. And due to people in my department that are telling students not to take my class because it's an elective, when it's actually a college requirement when they get to college, I've lost an entire class. They just disbanded one of my classes. And then I had to pick up a world history class. So I'm meeting new students and trying to fit and get these kids back in, because my dual enrollment students are those that are not in the magnet program. They're ones that are our zone kids. And, you know, we pay for through a grant, we pay for their college tuition. So they leave us with 12 college credits completely free. Because they take 2 classes, they have all the perks of a UNLV student, so they can actually go over to the UNLV campus. And this is stuff that these kids would never have. And for a colleague in my department to dissuade students from taking my class has just completely knocked me down. It just, you know, to to hear that and to know that it's a fellow social studies teacher. Like, and it's my department chair, and she's telling students, oh, her class is just an elective. So it just really, it's really taken a toll on me emotionally, to know that I work with these people and that they're just not, they're not supportive. I have gone to my principal and I told her, because the push is for more dual enrollment and less AP. And she teaches AP, so she kind of, I guess she thinks she's getting pushed out. But I've gone to, you know, my supervisor and everything. And one thing she said to me is, you need to hurry up and get your doctorate, because then you can tell her to shut the hell up. Because she got her doctorate last year, in like 18 months, and her thesis wasn't even on what she teaches, and it's she's just not a very nice person.
Yeah.
But I've been attempting to read. I've been trying to get into the stuff. The more I kind of get into the articles, the more I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been trying to do. This is exactly what I've been preaching. I'm not sure if it's this class or the other class, because right now my head's just all over the place. But there was an article, Learning to Claim Text. Is that this one, or
Learning, say again?
on Learning to Claim Text?
You're not talking about Ferrer's article, are you?
No, this one was Christine E. Sleater. I don't know.
Okay.
But so one of the things that kind of, especially after this week, she talks about the difference in the UC system and the CSU system, where one is fostering knowledge and the other one is just kind of creating students to verbally regurgitate knowledge. And I'm just like, that is exactly what I'm going through, because where I teach the special ed students that are, I don't want to say slower, but it takes them a little longer to grasp concepts, and she has AP students, and I'm expected to keep up with AP. And there's no allowances that are made, you know, for my students. It's just, oh, we'll just keep moving them on. Well, if they don't understand what we're talking about, how can I keep moving them on? How can I keep pushing them through? I mean, in a world history class, if you don't understand why A and B lead to C, you know, it's really hard to see the effects of it later on. And it just kind of reading this just kind of really blew my mind, because I'm like, you know, these are the students that we should be helping. These are the students that, you know, they need that extra oomph, whereas AP students are kind of self-motivated. They're going to do what they need to do. Whereas I have to put on a, you know, pony dance, show on pony dance every single class period, to get most of these kids to pay attention and to actually value their learning.
These are some of the challenges that I think we all face within the system, whether it's at the secondary level or higher ed and what have you, but something to discuss today, all right? The challenges that the system imposes and how individual actors and interlocutors respond to the challenges. So cognitive dissonance is something we should talk about today. So thank you for checking in. Tanya, your turn.
Hello. I'm good. I've been really busy. I start teaching this coming week on Tuesday. So it's we're just at start of classes of this fall quarter at Western Washington University, where I teach. So I've been lesson planning and, you know, tweaking things that I've taught before. These are all classes I've already taught, so that's kind of nice. But I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to put into place just from my studies at Antioch all through last year. So I've been busy doing that, and I'm so grateful for the Ken Robinson sort of reintroduction, because that's I've used the RSA Animate one is my favorite one, where they're drawing along with his talk. I I use that in my teacher ed courses. And in fact, I sort of looked him up just to see if I could get some more information. And he put out a book in 2016. I don't know if you know it, Creative Schools. I didn't even know he has that out, but it's based on the TED Talk. It's basically just an expansion of that TED Talk. And so I ordered that, and I'm gonna create some readings from that for my classes. So that was really cool to, that helped kind of shape a few things as well. But yeah, so just trying to get organized and get routines and schedules and sleep patterns back in check so I can, maintain everything and my readings. I've been really enjoying the readings in this course for sure. And I'm excited to talk today a bit about, about anti-intellectualism and to talk about, these ideas around student motivation as well, and what you were just talking about, Megan, in terms of like getting students to value their learning and participate, and why should they, and what's our role in that, and all of those pieces. So yeah, I'm just excited. I love these class discussions with Tony, so I'm excited to be here.
Very pleased you're here. Thank you, Tanya. Nina.
She went to feed her cats.
Oh, that's right. It says, I'm going to feed my 10 cats. 10 cats. Okay. It's quite a feat, I could imagine. So I'll check in with you all for a few minutes. What I've been up to. Well, I pretty much work all year round. So, given that I'm affiliated with different institutions and doing different projects and either writing a book or editing a book or teaching or traveling, etc. Sometimes my world is spinning, and sometimes it just, the sea is calm. And so it's always a collision of situations that create my world. And that has been really the story of my life anyways. So instead of going into my history, let me just say that life has been what it's always been, right? Periods of chaos with calm, ebbs and flows, and so on. But overall, I'm grateful where I am, living in California, living in this place, and being able to teach and hopefully make a difference in people's lives, and assigning meaning to my life that way, etc. Different classes have begun, other classes have ended. The most important work that I do, in my view, right now at this stage of my career, is this doctoral work with Antioch University. So I consider this a great privilege to be in your presence and working with you as colleagues. The forum has begun strong, so I like that. As you can see, we can't really exhaust everything in 2 weeks. It's really like an impossible task. That's why I think that these sessions are important, where we get together, kind of like touch on things that we've done, and then it sends us off to other places where on our own, right? We do the thinking, and we do the reading, and we do the reflection. And but it's good to have the online forum to just sort of go there and post things and have reflections. So here we are. It's good to be here. So when Nina comes back, we'll ask her to check in. But let's talk about some more specific things. One thing I did notice on the forum was that we didn't really touch on the various theories of teaching and learning. And I just wanted to do an overview of this stuff. You're all teachers, right? Every single one of us in this room is a teacher. So what we do is, and given that we have this common commitment to teaching being an instrument to facilitate social justice, fairness, and learning becoming something transformative rather than a process to create future functionaries of a system that creates structure around us. Difficult task, teachers, particularly in this country, have been underappreciated since day one, right? And continue to be underappreciated financially, figuratively, culturally, and so on, which is odd, right? Because, I mean, take Savannah's case, for example. She is working with 4 and 5-year-olds who, you know, if you pay attention, which you have, to Ken Robinson's talk, you know, he talks about how these kids come in to the system as geniuses. And they are geniuses, right? And then by the time they reach 4th, 5th grade, something happens. There's a drop off in their curiosity-based activities at school because they're being told to sit down, they're being told to be quiet, they're being told to do the homework, a lot of busy work and so on and so forth. A lot of this stuff, of course, was imposed upon teachers who went through teacher training. And I know this resonates with you all because you've been through various trainings and teachings and so on. And if you notice by just looking at these theories, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and maybe some of the stuff is just, you know, gone from the memory bank, but it resides in your consciousness in some ways because you're practicing teachers. So when I look at, you know, theories like behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, experiential learning, humanism, pedagogy, andragogy, and pragmatism, you know, John Dewey's work, Maxine Green's work, and I will dare to argue our work towards social justice, and then sensory theory and all that. One thing that I always come to conclusion with is that we're always practicing a combination, a hybrid form of all these theories that are at their core psychological theories, right? The psychology of human behavior and human learning is always important. When you're in the classroom, the most effective way of teaching with pupils, whether they're 4 years old or 40 years old, is what? Is to build what? Carl Jung, the famous psychologist Carl Jung, called rapport. Right? Rapport is this harmonious relationship between the teacher and the learner. And then if you apply pragmatist approach to this rapport, then the teacher also becomes co-learner. How can a teacher teach effectively? By effectively, I don't mean like in a functional sense that the system uses or in business, verbiage we use and so on. But effectively meaning making teaching transformative is if the teacher is learning how the student learns and then learning from the student's response to whatever the syllabus, the lesson, the structural, setup that you create in your classroom, etc. So with the theory of behaviorism, B.F. Skinner came up with this idea, and when you think about it, in capitalistic society in particular, it's a reward system, right? And we have that, like you go through this whole process, this one semester, with me, and what is your reward? The reward is twofold. One, in a functional sense, is that piece of writing that says, okay, exceeds expectations or meets expectations, and it's a passing grade, all right? It's not an A, B, C, D, like I evaluated you and you're a B student, A student, and so on. This is a different level of learning. So there's that typically understood and accepted convention of reward, the grade, right? Or me saying, well, you're doing a wonderful job, right? That's a reward. The other reward is you and the level of consciousness that has gone up or down, left or right, or is evolved, not evolved. You understand that, and I don't. Same with my level of consciousness that I understand and you don't. Nonetheless, I think it's reward related, because are we not always thinking about how we are perceived in the classroom in particular, like to be specific to our discussion today, because it's important, right? How students perceive you is how they're going to respond to you, and then by extension, respond to the teaching learning process. So behaviorism is important, but it can't be the only way that one teaches. Oh, if you can solve these math problems, then I'm gonna give you a piece of candy, all right? Like, walking around the classroom, becoming their favorite aunt or their favorite uncle and just passing candy all the time, all right? People will love you, your pupils will love you, the parents will love you and all that, but we know that that's not the answer to transformative teaching. Cognitivism, of course, as everything we do is a process of cognitivism. So constructivism is something that I often preach if asked. So how do you teach? What's your pedagogical approach, right? And for me, pedagogy is not just methodology. Pedagogy is philosophy of teaching, translated into practice. So it's science, methodology, and at its very core and the backdrop always is the philosophy of teaching. So asking questions, is this working? Is that going to work? Did this make a difference? Or what does it even mean? Because there are times where we get disillusioned with the system. Like Megan was talking about her colleague offering this disappointing behavior of, discouraging others from taking her class and all that. Kind of like saying, well, okay, the inner politics of the academy is not really any different than inner politics of any other institution, where individuals are jockeying for power and trying to, one up the other and so on and so forth. And then career opportunists are always around in any institution. Even in places where everyone is committed to social justice, you're going to have people who are competitive and they're, career opportunists, which is detrimental to real teaching and learning. But it's there. All right. So constructivism recognizes those factors in the process, I think. Experiential learning is something that we're actually doing here too with theory, right? This is strictly a theoretical class. We're dealing with theories, we're dealing with, reflective thoughts and how we see things, how we produce knowledge, and then either critiquing or celebrating somebody else's theory and then building upon it, right? So the immanent critique is an important part of it, and that's where construction occurs, right? And so we're experientially going there, right? How do we go about this? We have a Zoom session, we get together. If we were to get together once a week in a room, it would be more powerful than what we do online. But in the absence of that ability, we have this. We sit around and we simulate that room. We're sitting here, in many ways, we are in that room. We're looking at each other's faces, we're communicating non-verbally and so on, and as well as, literally speaking to one another and reflecting on everything. The sensory theory, if you're teaching, and this is something teaching by doing, right? A PE teacher does nothing but sensory application of teaching. Okay, run this way. What does that feel? Were you able to control the ball? Or, pull yourself up, Does that work, et cetera, et cetera? Can we do that in theoretical conditions? Can we do that in spaces where you're teaching history, for example? How do you bring the sensory theory into play? It's always a good question to ask. And Megan wants to chime in with that, and this is where she shall chime in with some examples, perhaps.
I hope that I bring, the sensory theory into the classroom. I try to make sure that the kids are immersed in it, that, when we talk about history, that they have the stories that probably aren't in the textbook, so that they know exactly what these people are going through, that they get a more cultural perspective than here, memorize these dates and these events and let's move on. But really trying to understand, develop empathy for the people that we study. I think one of the prime examples that we go through are the Germans during the time of Nazism. And, just their first kind of reaction is, oh, well, I would never do that. Well, let's think about this. Let's try to understand why these people acted the way that they did. And, even when we talk about the Columbus Exchange and when they throw the enslaved individuals in, we always talk about, the horrible things that are done, but we've never talked about how they resisted or, some of the positives. So I think trying to give them a complete picture, not just, words and readings, but so that they can actually feel and see kind of how things developed.
Yeah. Do you check in with the students? Say you're talking about, how human beings are capable of collectively being complicit with acts of evil and not really knowing it. And when they sort of recognize that anybody is capable of doing evil, do you check in with them and say, how do you feel body-wise, right? Do you tense up? Do you feel like, you're uncomfortable where you're sitting and that sort of thing? And that's where the sensory stuff comes in, right? Because learning is a whole process. We're using our bodies as instruments of doing all kinds of things, right? Physical.
I have them keep a journal, especially, so the dual enrollment class I teach is race, class, and gender in the United States. And I mean, anything goes in my class. They are allowed to talk about anything, but they keep a journal so that, they can react how they're feeling. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm not going to read your journal, but I want you to have a way of kind of digesting this stuff, because a lot of stuff we talk about is heavy. So they, they all keep a journal, and they kind of just show me that they're doing something with it, as a way of kind of being able to just air stuff out.
Cool. Let's, in the interest of time, and Tia just joined us. Hopefully she'll have a camera. Oh, where is she? Just admitted her in. She'll come in. There are a number of things that came up during the first 2 weeks of our forum discussion. Anti-intellectualism. I think somebody should take the lead on that. And Tanya, I think perhaps you can take the lead on this discussion when we talk about anti-intellectualism in this country. Did it start just since the advent of the interweb with social media and all that, or has it had a long history in our country, and is it just part and parcel to American culture, as it were? Right. That Maxine Greene talks about quiche, and then she uses Milan Kundera's famous novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which actually was made into a movie too. And the movie is very good. It's a good interpretation of the book, and I highly recommend it. If you can get a hold of a copy somewhere, or find that in a streaming service. But so the relationship between quiche and intellectualism and the kind of work that teachers must do in building bridges, perhaps between the two or not, and that sort of thing. Do you want to take the lead on this, Tanya?
I'm happy to, to dive in with this, but I wanted to first sort of get a clarification on anti-intellectualism, because from my understanding of it, it's the stance of the anti-intellectual is one that represents more of the, the common man's issues, and feels that those that are intellectuals or are part of an elite status, of people who aren't as concerned with the common good. So I feel like I'm not understanding it, because from the article that I was referencing, the how the past 10 years we've become uniquely stupid. It's more about the fact that we have become because of and it's not starting from social media, and actually I was going to go back in and correct that. I didn't mean to say that was the genesis of it. The way actually Haidt talks about it, he goes back to the taking down of the Berlin Wall as sort of the big. I wrote some notes on that I was going to share. So maybe we can just start with just making sure we're talking about the same thing. With that, because I don't think he's saying that there is a stance against intellectualism. We're not thinking about it either way, because we're not engaging in critical thought for a variety of reasons. But part of it is the way that we are thinking about issues, particularly to do with politics and society. The loudest voices get the most airtime. A lot of this is shared through social media and online. A lot of it is shared anonymously, where there are a few consequences. And these are temporary engagements, so there's nothing really to lose. And so there ends up being just this fodder of like, a lot of it is false information. We believe it, we go running with it, and we're not understanding each other. And then another point he makes is the fact that there's a lack of dissent on both sides of the argument because of these loud voices taking over. So when there's no dissent and discussion happening on either side, that shuts down our critical engagement with those issues, and just sort of that dominant, voice ends up representing that. So those were the sorts of things that really, really interested me from that article. But when you brought up anti-intellectualism, I mean, does that still fit in the way you were posing that, Tony?
Well, from my perspective, yes, absolutely. It's all part of the same discourse. But I would like others to sort of chime in here, and because you brought up a good point. It's important for us to be on the same page about what are we talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
What does this really mean to be anti-intellectual? And one could just look at sheer numbers and say, well, somebody like Donald Trump gives a speech and says, I love the uneducated. All right, basically saying, hey, you dummies, I love you guys. Go ahead and vote for me, even though I think you're just nothing but a bunch of stupid people, right? And then there's massive support for this guy, who represents, at least in action, right, the embodiment of what an anti-intellectual is. But that's one way of seeing it. The other way is like through the historical / cultural lens. So is this really embedded in our overall general culture? You have a lot of people in America, in this society, United States, think in binary terms about people. So, well, you're either a liberal or a conservative. But you can be conservative about lots of things and be liberal about lots of other things. And the excluded middle is, I think, where intellectualism really resides. And so that's how I see it, but let's see what others have to say. Marcia, you look like you want to unmute yourself and jump right in.
I'm not quite sure. I am fascinated with the term, the anti-intellectualism. I haven't really thought about it too much, but when I think of that, like you just said, there's some that are thinking one side and there's some in the bottom. And those of us that are squashed in the middle of not knowing which direction, we kind of sustain ourselves there. And I find myself a lot of times doing this when I want to say something, but I'm not quite sure which direction that's going to go. Does that resonate? And I see it sometimes. I'm a very visual person and I relate a lot of things to art and the things that have evolved throughout our humanity of reflecting what we're thinking at the time. So I think of maybe like political cartoons or political, I don't know, that type of thing. I see those and then it starts making me think, okay, you know, who the heck, what the heck are they wanting us to really see here? You know?
Right.
I hope that doesn't sound bland, but I mean, could we look at, maybe I'm opening up a whole can of worms here. I'm not sure. Maybe this is the wrong thing to say. Maybe anti-intellectualism, maybe critical race theory. Is that?
How do you mean?
I'm not sure. I guess those of us that are trying to make sense and understand why others are looking at this in one perspective, but we know in our mind the right thing, the right way to think about this and go into this ideology, but yet we're treated like we're just kind of lost in the middle.
When you say we, do you mean educators or do you mean people?
I think so.
Or?
I think I think educators in general.
So you mean like you know the right way to think about what critical race theory is and that.
I think so. I think that's what yes.
And how you're saying that the louder voices are kind of making it so that there's a lot of confusion about it and keeping that preventing that meaning from getting.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
I'd love to respond to that, but first I wanted to respond to something you said, Tony, about Trump saying, I love uneducated people. Yeah, totally. And I think that, but when you then said, I love you stupid people, they're not seeing it that way, of course. And they're seeing him respecting their own sense of intellect and understanding. You know what I mean? Like he's meaning, I love all of you who are not, brainwashed by academia, kind of a thing. I think that's how they're seeing it. They're seeing it as a compliment, not as an insult, right? And he knows exactly what to say, and that's why there's such a following and why he's so popular. I think that that's an important point, but I think that it still does speak to this anti-intellectualism. Yeah, I'll go ahead, Marcia.
I'm so sorry. I'm sitting on my hands. So I come from an agricultural background. We live here on a family farm. I see this a lot with Trump and the issue of I'm going to be your buddy because I'm supporting the American farmer. And it irritates me because in essence, he's really not supporting the American farmer, but the majority of the industry that I live and work in, the agricultural end, believe that he is there to help them. So I do in that aspect, I can see what you're saying about Trump. I'm sorry, just chiming in.
That's good stuff. So Tanya, you wanted to bring up another point?
No, well, just about critical race theory, because it is true. If you think about the politicalization of it, it is the many politicians have used this in their campaigns to get votes, and they are reducing the argument for critical race theory to the fact that teachers want to create racism in their classes. They want to teach racism to their students. They want to, that it's divisive. They want to divide people, that's totally racist. And there's such a deep misunderstanding of, first of all, what CRT is. Secondly, the fact that that is not even what's being taught in schools, but it doesn't matter. We're so caught up in arguing about the terms of this that we're not getting to the real issue of why it's so important to talk about race as a system, and why there are certain people who are so afraid of that very conversation. But in the meantime, all these policies have already been put into law, preventing us from preventing teachers, and I would love at some point, we don't have to do it today, but to talk to other teachers here about their experiences with it in their schools. Like, how much is that being enforced and policed, and what consequences are you actually seeing on the ground with teachers? To me, it's a really frightening time in that regard. But yeah, I guess with this, this argument, what you were saying, Marcia, I guess that does make sense, that these louder voices are making it so the middle, who's really trying to consciously and critically think about these things, are end up just keeping their mouths shut and staying out of it, because they don't have the same volume on their megaphones to make any impact, or so they think. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of CRT.
Tia has rejoined us. It's good to have you back. We started talking about the notion of anti-intellectualism and just what it really means and all that. We're opening it up. Maybe we should talk about what intellectualism is about in the first place, so we can see what is the opposition to that, and why would people want to be opposed to intellectual activities by engaged citizens? Doesn't it mean for an engaged citizen in a democracy, for that citizen to be thinking through things and wanting to open it up and wanting to learn more about an issue of concern and so on, from a historical point of view, from a phenomenal point of view, and so on, and then have an informed opinion about it? Is that the process of intellectualism, or is it something more like what we do in the academy, where everything is in theoretical sense and has no relationship in terms of what some other people see, no relationship to actual everyday life? What are your thoughts about what is intellectualism? I mean, we fancy ourselves in this room and other spaces as intellectuals, don't we? Or am I wrong to make that assumption?
I actually wouldn't consider myself to be an intellectual, because to me that's divisive, and that's a part of the problem, especially when you look at marginalized groups, that they're otherized, and so who they are is not allowed or accepted into formal education historically. So therefore they think of themselves, and they've been conditioned to see themselves as inferior, and that's a problem within itself. So I believe to open up the space where we don't have such an anti-intellectual sentiment, we have to start accepting different forms of intelligence. I look at an individual as my child who on paper struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia, but when his reading comprehension was off the charts. So it was a matter of his brain worked differently, but that didn't mean that he wasn't an intellectual. So I try to stay away from that type of language, because the people where you need to think and you need to lead, if you put yourself in that type of bracket, now you're not approachable to the people where you can actually be on the ground to get your hands dirty if need be. So I just consider myself as a thinking person, and I might think differently than other people, but I'm just another type
of learner.
This is an interesting approach. So what you're proposing is let's stay away from the labels that are embedded in any society. So intellectual, anti-intellectual, non-thinking person, thinking person, this and that. And let's just think of it in terms of, are we thinking humans? Is that the right way of understanding what you're saying? Nina was nodding her head, and I think she's thinking, I want to chime in. I want to say some things here.
Well, that's just exactly what I was going to say. It was the labels. I mean, that's what gets to everybody, is everyone has a label. Everyone has a category. Everyone has a, I am this, I am that. And so when you mentioned, let's get away from the labels, I was like, yes, let's get away from the labels. But how do we do that? That's the bigger question. How do we move away from labels? How do we move away from learn, unlearn? How do we move away from that
Categorizing each other?
Sure, like, or just not just each other, but categorizing literally the way we learn.
Yeah.
You know, the smarter kids are going to learn this way. You know, the regular kids are going to learn this way. Or an elementary level, you know, the banana kids are going to learn this way. The apple kids are going to learn this way. The melon kids are going to learn this way, because we don't want to, you know, give them actual labels, but we need to categorize them somehow. So how do we uncategorize them and still let them learn at a pace that they are able to learn?
Okay, well, here's a question. You know, I want us to sort of think about this and see how we would respond to such a situation. Say, hypothetically speaking, you are you're well informed about the history of Latin America, right? What has happened with colonization, you know, the colonial powers coming and taking over Latin America, and that going through changes and so forth, and you know, various countries from North America, Central and South America, you know, Mexico and El Salvador and Guatemala. There's so many different countries, you know. They have the common language of Spanish, with the exception of Brazil, of course, right? And then different cultures, and they also have the common experience of being part of the transatlantic slave trade, common experience of being colonial subjects and then being free, and then living in the post-colonial age, you know, various movements, all kinds of things that it's rich, right? Somebody who reads about that, because, you know, we live here in the American continent, and one would say that for a strong society, a strong thinking society and democratic society, its citizens need to be aware of the history of at least their own region. But you're all teachers, and you read newspapers, you pay attention to the news, you read up on history, et cetera, et cetera. You travel and you know about people, you're in contact with international people and so forth. To what extent does the average American have any level of awareness about the rest of America, including Canada. You know, and so let's say you have somebody like that who doesn't have much of a knowledge, can't even point on a map to the country that you may bring up and say, well, show me where El Salvador is, you know, that kind of stuff. And then you want to get into a discussion about the policies, foreign policies of the United States towards Mexico, for example. How do you enter into that discussion with that person if you want to honor that person's presence and existence as a citizen who is not, you know, doesn't have your level of awareness, and then, you know, perhaps they don't even care. And why isn't it that they don't care about the history of their neighbors and their relationship to their neighbors, politically, culturally, etc.? Is it possible to enter into that conversation? Or do you have to limit the conversations to movies, food, you know, sports, and that sort of thing?
I might not be understanding the question. So you're saying us as educators, what do we think of, you know, having a conversation about this knowledge, all of the aspects you just mentioned? Would that be possible with someone who did not have an awareness of these things? Would it be
Yeah.
possible in order to engage with something like, you know, policy or immigration or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, right now, let's just pick a contemporary issue that is in the news all the time. The war between Ukraine and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm sure people talk about it because it's on the agenda, right? It's on the news agenda by the agenda setters, being, you know, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, all the rest of them, right? PBS, etc. They get a certain kind of narrative about the war, but one person may have more knowledge about the other narratives that are part of the story, and then your average American citizen has one awareness. How do you discuss the Ukraine and Russia? Imagine, you know, maybe you've gotten into conversation with folks about this. People talk about it. What is it? What are the kinds of things they're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jump right in, you guys. Yeah.
I don't. So one of the strategies that we just started AVIT training for our high school students, and I've used one of their strategies. I see what you're saying. However, let me ask you about this. So you're kind of not only honoring where the person is and giving them that space that instead of saying, no, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. Someone is going to break down as soon as you say that. So you kind of have, even if you don't agree with them, you kind of have to just allow them that space so that they are open to additional information. And I use it with my kids all the time in class, where they have to repeat what the other person said so that they're acknowledging that, and then they go on with theirs. And it helps them to start to listen to other perspectives, even if they're like totally against it. But it acknowledges that, you know, that person in front of them does have worth and does have a perspective, and you know, has their space and time. So I think that's one of the things that you could do is, you know, maybe approach it first off is, I see where you're coming from and I understand. However, because I know that if you start out with, no, you're wrong, those people are like, I'm done. I'm not talking to you. I'm done. And that's just with anything, that as soon as you tell someone that they're wrong, they shut down, or something that they are genuinely disagree with. they kind of shut down with all communication. So I think by acknowledging that they have a presence, that they have space, that they can, you may or may not change their opinion, you may or may not give them additional information, but at least they're more willing to listen than just putting up that front and completely breaking down where you don't have a chance to get your opinion.
Yeah, but is that universally applicable with every topic? Say, for example, somebody says, well, the presidential election was stolen from us. Do you say, well, I see what you're saying, I acknowledge your point of view. That's clearly a false statement. If I say
Well, you
that,
could say, I can see why, where you may have come to that conclusion. I can see what the source of that might be. Because that person is certainly not alone. There are many, who are in agreement with that, as preposterous as it is, right? So maybe just acknowledging the source, not necessarily the individual or their train of thinking, something like that.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Acknowledging the person's dignity as a thinking person, right, is what you are all saying. And saying, well, let's look at the sources that you are being informed by. And these are excellent approaches. Thought, not person, Nina says. Good point. So are we a society where folks are confused about where they stand intellectually and otherwise? Because, this whole business of like, when you politicize a part of our history, like what they've done, like some folks have done, the right wing has done to critical race theory. It's like, oh, well, we can't teach about the history of slavery all that much to kids in the second and third grade. And why not? That is our history. Oh, no, because then my 7-year-old is going to think that he's a racist. That's a ridiculous notion, right? It's preposterous to think that kids are, they're that malleable that this is what they're going to come home to, right? So it's more like maybe they're looking at a mirror and they're seeing some really ugly things in that mirror about themselves and say, okay, now our kids are going to kind of like understand that this was our history. In Germany, grade school kids learn about the Holocaust and learn about Nazism. And they haven't had any issues in terms of, people other than, neo-Nazis who were crazy to begin with anyways. People say, well, we can't be teaching this stuff. We can't be teaching about the Holocaust because kids are going to come and think that, oh, they're racist against Jews and homosexuals, etc. Right. That hasn't happened. Yet more awareness about, holy shit, we are a country that collectively supported this systemic racism that ended up, yielded killing 6 million people because they happen to be, Jewish, homosexual, etc.
What do you think the difference is there, Tony? What's the difference between why is Germany able to do that and we're not?
It's an excellent question. I certainly have my own opinion, but I wonder what others think about this. Why is it that they're successful at that, and now we're having so many issues with it because there's another political faction just pushes against it, and there's massive support behind it. Germany is a capitalistic society like ours, but there is a difference, and maybe this helps. They have a socialist democracy, as opposed to our, republic that is a two-party system that's really part of the business party, etc. Yeah. What do we have in the chat here? Isabel Wilkins cast the origins of our discontents hits on this. Yes. Their field trip is to, yes. Megan, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
So my husband's family is from Germany. They immigrated in 1978 to here. and, talking to his family, going over there and visiting. I think one of the big differences is this idea of nationalism. Up until the Germans won the World Cup in 2004. I think that's when Germany beat Brazil. There were no flag, like Germany did not have flags. They did not hang the flags outside their house. There wasn't this idea of a German nationalism. And, and I think that that's something that we have here in this country with, the flag and the pledge and whether or not we stand for the national anthem and everything's so politicized.
Mhm.
It's almost like if you disagree with this, then you're going against the country and you're not showing that nationalism and you're not being American. Whereas in Germany, when they question it, it wasn't, I don't think it's seen as unpatriotic because they didn't have that nationalism. They didn't have that pride in their country. From what they've told me, it was football that brought them together again. But there's still a lot of unhealed wounds, especially in the division of East and West, especially with the people from the West. Germany having to pick up the people in East Germany. So I think that's one of the big things is, if they spoke out against Nazism or that, and the country has flat out said, yeah, we did this. Yes, we are responsible for this. Yes, it happened under our watch. And we're going to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And they've gone through and they've put memorials up and they've put, in Berlin, there's things called stumbling stones, where when you walk, they're just like this big, but they're raised and they show, or they have the person's name, what their job was, and possibly what happened to them if they knew, all over the city of where these people were taken. So I think it's the fact that they're taking ownership of it and saying, this happened under our watch, this happened in our country, it was horrible, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I think it's kind of twofold on that part, is their acknowledgement that it happened, because America still doesn't acknowledge half the stuff that it's done, and the idea of nationalism.
So,
Thank-
thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, Megan, that I believe that the answer is a lack of acknowledgement. It's a lack of acknowledgement because when you have to acknowledge it, you have to say, well, this isn't just historical, this is ongoing.
Mhm.
And so if you have to acknowledge that it's ongoing, now you actually have to confront the systems that you've been, and that's the patriotic part. You have to confront the systems and say, oh, well, the systems aren't that great.
Mhm.
And now that can bring a sense of anarchy. Well, what do you do with these systems now? How can we be entrusted to continue on the systems, knowing that the foundation of the systems and therefore how they are continuing is based on a faulty premise?
Mhm.
And so it's a very, in that way, it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing to acknowledge that that what you've entrusted for your daily life, your identity in a sense, is wrong.
Mhm.
So I think that that's the core issue, is that there's a fear to acknowledge what is actually true, which we know is true. Because at that point in time, what do you actually do with it?
Right.
So I think their racist, Tanya, I was looking at yours. I think their racism is slightly different in Germany. Instead of black and white here in this country,
That's what I mean. Yeah.
they're very much, they have an open immigration policy. And
Yeah.
anyone that is Western Asian or darker complexion, especially those that are coming up from Syria and Turkey into Germany,
Mhm.
you see a horrible, just it's despicable what is happening to them over there. So I think you kind of see the racism slightly different in as far as towards the groups of people that are in Germany versus here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you want to say more about how it is that there's a refusal to acknowledging this dark history and the refusal to acknowledging the present history. Racism, white supremacy is in every institution in this country. It's institutionalized. So kids at school don't learn adequately about the history of racism, don't learn adequately about the genocide of the Native Americans that allowed all these European immigrants to sort of build up this country. That's a history of this nation. And we must learn it so we don't become these, there's these false premises that many of these institutions are built upon. In one of the reasons that so many people are in fear of progressives taking over, people of color being in charge of everything and all that, is that they think that their identity will be lost as European Americans. But what is that identity in the first place? Right?
So is your talking point for the next 45 minutes to talk about how the lack of racism is taught in schools?
How do you mean?
So,
Say more. Yeah.
okay. So if I understood your question, you want to talk about how the lack of racism, the lack of that entire history is taught in schools.
Not lack of racism, but the history of slavery. And
Right.
Yeah, racism. Yeah.
I think we're gonna need more than 45 minutes.
Right.
So that was my joke. Is
Okay,
I think
yeah.
we're gonna need more than 45 minutes.
Right.
Is that is just such a big subject.
Mhm.
And something that, we can talk about and we can kind of tackle,
Mhm.
but, I think what is more important is what can we do in our classrooms, or for like me who's in humane education, like what can I do like in the field to combat that. And so I think where racism still exists in education, sorry for my dog. She's very excited I'm home and is very protective since my husband died. So sorry. So I think it's a very, like, we could spend a 2-hour long conversation on that subject alone, is I think what I'm kind of getting at.
Okay. Yes, Marsha.
To go off of what Nina was talking about, it's like, where do we begin with that? And I truly feel in every part of my being that it starts in our classroom with teaching our children, our students, tolerance and to have that culturally responsive classroom. I think it's easier to, well, it would be less difficult to teach them from the beginning this ideology of understanding that we're all different. We bring something different to the table. We're all unique, but we have to embrace those things. Instead of fight against them, we need to embrace them. And for example, I have children from Turkey. I have immigrant children who've come in from Ukraine who only speak Russian. We have no ELL teachers. It's been extremely challenging trying to not only teach them and try to meet them where they're at, but my goal is not so much meeting them where they're at academically. My goal is to bring that lesson of tolerance, that embracing of one another. And I think that's huge. To be able to get that and make those connections with these kids, you have to establish that before they can even move in, to learning anything else.
So do you mean establish sort of when you say culturally responsive curriculum, are you talking about sort of honoring where people come from and their voices and their experiences, and making them feel heard and seen?
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. Not only have I want them, which you talked about sources earlier, the primary source, they are the primary source of their journey. And I encourage them, if they have something to say and they want to contribute it, I want them to feel like this is a safe place, a platform for them to be able to do it. What a wonderful opportunity to share that with all the other students, that are with them. I also think that not only am I teaching our kids, what the standard says I need to teach them, but I'm embracing some of those things. For example, I got my hands on some folk tales from the Ukraine, and some other novelists and some other authors that I knew the children would relate to. So not only are they embracing their culture, but my regular ELA children, my students, they're learning one and the same. So I think that connectivity is really important.
Yeah.
How would you approach then talking about our history, or
Right.
talking about racism as a systemic issue, which is, vehemently denied by some people?
Right. That's a really good question. And it's interesting you say that. Really embrace the children from the Ukraine. And they tend to have more of a conversation of what's happened to them before they came to the United States. And I've noticed that the kids who are here now, who've lived here their entire life, who are citizens, they tend to not want to ask those questions. The Turkish children will come forth and talk about this with them. I don't know if they're afraid, or again, we're going back to that. I'm in the middle. I'm not sure what to say or what to ask. But I've noticed that the Ukraine children, once they felt comfortable, they're willing to share their experience. But as far as me, I'm not quite sure. I think, honestly, I don't have an answer for how do I respond. The only thing I can do is listen and give them the opportunity to share that. I'm still learning and growing with that myself. Mm-hmm. This is a whole new concept for me. How do you deal with children who's talking about war? 2 months ago, they were, homeless trying to get here, with nothing but a bag. And, how do you respond? How do you respond to that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're talking about kind of different things. Like when it comes to, I guess, when it comes to teaching our history, right? I mean, I think we can all safely say here that none of us, on this call have had an adequate history education ourselves. So as teachers, that's one of the issues, is that we are all still in the process of learning our true American history. I mean, the things that the connections I started to make and understandings post George Floyd, I had no idea, no clue. Things like Juneteenth, for example, things that I also feel just from my own heritage, I should know. You
Mhm.
know, I was never taught these things. And these things are intentionally left out of the curriculum and out of our history books. So when it comes to writing that wrong, you know, and teaching our accurate history, I mean, there are blocks all over the place to that. And part of that now is this whole critical race theory debate that's put all of these bans in place now that is barring specific language we're not able to use in order to discuss these things. And it's such a gray, murky area that, you know, almost anything can be construed as being divisive and shaming or making students feel bad or whatnot. So I think, you know, students who are coming, you know, who are refugees of war, you know, definitely a real coming from a standpoint of listening and learning and understanding something that maybe is not affecting you know, most students in our classroom. But I think when it comes to history, this is something that as Americans, we all need to understand. We all need to be given the truth of it. We need to be able to talk about it. And that's, yeah, it is tricky. But yeah, I think that's a conversation that I think we really need to have at some point as teachers.
So there's two parts that I want to speak of. So Marcia, I definitely hear what it is that you're saying, and I believe that there is actually maybe an intersection, and this is something that I'm discovering, that trauma-informed education and culturally irrelevant approaches to education can have that convergence point. They do intersect. So I think in both ways, you have to acknowledge both of them. You can't just, so even when talking about history, we also have to think about trauma-informed practices and cultural relevance in the same breath. My answer specifically to your point, Tanya, is that that's the reason why I left the classroom. And that's the reason why I'm at Antioch with the concentration of social justice leadership. So I don't call myself an educator, just that anymore. I'm a right educator and advocate.
Mhm.
It's virtually impossible to be in the classroom and to be able to maintain your job and speak the truth. It just is. That's the harsh reality. So you need, unfortunately, more educators out of the classroom to really advocate for the educators in the classroom.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, excellent point about the sites of pedagogy. If you recall from the interview with Giroux that I listed as the readings, he does point to this, that he told me this a long time ago. The real sites of pedagogy, and this speaks to the point that Tia brought up, it's not really the classroom anymore, right? The real sites of pedagogy are outside the classroom. They're in social media spaces. They're in television programs. They're in movies. They're in, how the culture industry constructs and perpetuates a particular ideology. Kids on Native American reservations, right, generations past, and this generation is different, but past generations learned about their own history through the Westerns. Right? Who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, the Indians, and the white people, and all that. Many kids in America learn about the history of racism through movies and television programs, right? Then advocates, community organizers, and activists that work for civil rights, whether it's for that, humane education, whether it's for animal rights, whether it's for LGBTQ rights, whether it's for general civil rights, whether it's for Black Lives Matter. And, we have a long list of things that we have to fight for, right? There are educators out there, right? To what extent they have, now here's the bigger question to ask. Now that we kind of recognize that the classroom is just one of the sites of pedagogy. And you know, it's been, teachers are de-skilled and teachers are under pressure and teachers are overburdened with administrative work and responsibilities, and they're managed with their performance with these today's conditions. This is the kind of stuff we're going to talk about when we get to neoliberalism and what's happening and all that, performance management and overseeing of things, atomizing, right, the work and so forth. We are seeing that the classroom, the sacred space that it must be, is not for many people. Right? And it's a real struggle, right? And it's a testament to you all being in the classrooms and doing the hard work of you know, being committed to fairness and social justice, equity, and all the rest of it. It's a difficult process, but our kids, whether they are 5 years old or they're 20 years old, right, they're learning about the world to some extent in the classroom, but to a large extent outside the classroom. So as educators, we have to rethink the way in which we teach or we facilitate policies that can help teachers and so on. I mean, you look at like the country, we're doing a little comparison, Germany and the United States. Germany is a parliamentary system, all right? So different parties are in charge of creating policies, and so there's different voices that gain power. The Turkish Germans, the descendants of the Turkish workers that were brought into Germany to build the German economy, and then later, you know, there's a lot of racism against them and so on. Their kids have become Germans of Turkish descent. Now they have representation in the parliament. They have voices. They can speak to those issues. Here in this country, we don't have a parliamentary system. We have two parties that oftentimes are handmaidens of, especially today, of a billionaire class that determines what policies should be brought forward. Like, I mean, look at somebody like, his first name is Joe Manchin, right? The Democratic senator. Is he from Pennsylvania? Am I right? I'm mixing up my states here. Yeah.
West Virginia.
Where is it? Oh,
West
West
Virginia.
Virginia, right. West Virginia, right. I was thinking of something else with Pennsylvania. Anyways, he gains so much power. One person, one individual, who is vested in you know, is it the coal industry that he's part and parcel to the fossil fuel, you know, sector of the country. So he's able to change national policies with one vote, all right, one man. Now, if you had a parliamentary system, somebody like, you know, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, wouldn't be a Democrat. Perhaps there would be a party called the Progressive Party, and she would be a member of that party, and they would have a voice. Now, what happens with parliamentary systems is that we look and we see, oh, okay, I can join this party, I can join that party, I can have a seat at the table. So I'm going to be more informed about issues. All right. So we're not disillusioned about politics if that's our system. So people get more involved about all kinds of things, whether it's local or global. All right. And then they get involved. And maybe that's one of the reasons where those countries who have strong democratic parliamentary systems also have very strong education systems, where they allocate more funds and resources and training to the training of teachers and building schools that are equal in funding and resources and capabilities. All right, so you don't have poor neighborhoods ending up having poor schools, rich neighborhoods, rich schools, so their kids have more advantages, better programs, et cetera, and all that. So we need to go after a fundamental change to a system that kind of ties our hands behind our backs and then holds our face and goes, go this way, go that way, and gives us the freedom to make change. Tall order, but if you don't talk about it, then it doesn't happen. So it has to be talked about, and then it has to happen. What this program is about being not only theoretical but practical. So scholar practitioners is who we are. So we put the practice into the theory, right? The theory into practice. So it goes like this.
Well, what about teachers who, as you said so rightly before, we're underappreciated and undervalued and underpaid and all of that, when there are an increasing amount of consequences now to talking about these things, to hinting at some sort of a, revolutionizing our education so that it's more, reflective of important issues and the truth. To what extent should teachers risk their jobs and risk, there are so many teachers leaving the profession that some of them are threatened by, families and by people, some of them, and so, and I'm also curious to know, like, what do you predict for the future? Because I feel like we're in such an interesting, scary time of censorship. And yeah. So what about those vulnerable, the teacher, what should those teachers do who fear losing their job and their income? And then what do you foresee happening over the next, let's just keep it at 5 years?
This is a lot of pressure for me to answer these questions. What's going to happen in 5 years? What should we do? What do you think what do you think is going to happen? Where are we right now? The prospects there are a lot of unknowns. Right? I mean, in November of this year, we're going to have a consequential, perhaps the most consequential midterm election of the history of this nation in the past 50 years. Right? I mean, I believe that to be a factual statement, given the actors involved. I mean, right now you have crazy people, literally crazy people in the House of Representatives, right? Not just ideologues. Again, you look at somebody like Mitch McConnell and say, well, he's ideologically to the right and he's just fighting for that ideology, and you can call it evil, you can call it bad, you can call it great, whatever, but he's not crazy. But then you got people like, who's that woman, Marjorie Greene, right? Who believes in these like crazy, fantastical ideas. My son was talking about some of her conspiracy theories that she spouts, and then she brings a gun into the house. It's just, and these people are very dangerous, but they are in the government. So to predict the future 5 years from now is very difficult. One thing is for sure, that the billionaire class who protect their families from any system, right? Because there's transnationals, and they're not really, but yet they can, with a click of a mouse, all right, give funds to one group or another, and then determine the future of one industry versus the other, and so on. They're going to be around. Right? We don't see a movement that is going against the billionaire classes, trying to like start regulation and everything and all that. Hopefully we'll get there someday. But then we got the climate crisis to deal with and all that. So maybe that will force us into becoming more of a parliamentary system. But what's going to happen to our education system? What's going to happen to our political apparatus operating? Are we going to have more crazies in charge? Or are we going to have some sane voices that bring about bipartisanship, and bring about, new policies, and bring about, hey, let's give more money to our schools. Let's give more money. Bernie Sanders said, well, let's have all teachers nationwide to make at least $60,000 a year, right? That's a reasonable proposal, right? But do you see that happening? Yeah. And then why is it that with confidence, you shake your head, right? So that's the future, right? That's what I can say about it, but perhaps others have some other ideas that hidden dimensions that need to be brought forward. Let me ask you this question, the entire group. Is our work, what we do here, the Zoom, the sessions, the papers, all this stuff, is it important? Important to the extent where you think that it's going to make a difference? Now, it could be important personally to you, career-wise, etc., but I'm just saying generally. Yeah. So Tanya, you're saying that things are going to get worse?
Yeah, I think that, the things that one of the reasons why, Trump has had the success that he's had, there's a payoff to being as loud and aggressive. And, when we get a payoff for acting a certain way and we get nothing for doing, say, the right thing, it's not very motivating. I think that until we shift our values from this, everything's on capitalism, money, the class disparity. I mean, I don't see a ton of hope until, and we need better leadership. Where are our leaders? Where are, there's so much fear, I think, as well, that's preventing those leaders that we need from stepping forward. But our system it's scary. I think people are just too afraid they're just going to get decimated out there because of the power structures that we have and who's in charge. So, and how do we shift our values? I think that comes from leadership. So yeah, I'm not very hopeful, and I hate to be so pessimistic. I'm not normally, so I'm always glass half full and all of that. But lately, I have not been able to do that very well. Yeah.
Is that a sentiment shared by others too?
It is. I agree with what you said, Tina, about the leadership. We've got, something's got to happen on a larger and bigger scale. I still take it back and to myself. It kind of still resonates with me that we have to think, as far as me, I can say for myself as an educator, I have to work with what the tools I have with now. And I think that having conversations within my classroom, or the students able to give them the ability to have a voice and be a part of that is so important, because later on, they're going to be the ones that's making these decisions. They're going to also be the ones who are, electing our government, our officials. They're the ones that's going to possibly become the leaders. So I think that on a level right now, what I can do here in the present is to support that. It's scary, but I wish I could think bigger. It just,
Yeah, and I think one of the ways we need to do that is to foster critical thinking, in our classrooms. And that's why, banning all of these things we're not allowed to talk about, it's just, I feel like we've gone back to the Middle Ages, and we are going to produce these leaders in the future who won't get it, and we'll have been brainwashed just as much as the rest of us really have in many ways. So I think that is first and foremost is as educators really finding ways to develop those tools and skills in our students to really dissect things, to really think critically about information that they come across, in school, outside of school, get families involved, communities. So, but yeah, critical thinking.
Well, I always, when these issues come up and we think about, well, things look pretty bleak, the near future and so on. I borrow from Antonio Gramsci, where he said, we must employ the pessimism of the intellect, which is what we're saying here, and optimism of the will. right? One of the unique things about our America, if you will, has always been, and I think continues to be, is that this unique sense of optimism in this country, despite all the atrocities that have occurred and all the injustices that happen every day and so on. There's just sort of sense of optimism that people from outside of the United States always talk about. You know, I like that optimism about Americans. Sometimes it's naive, very naive, but it's nonetheless, it's very strong and it's there. So it's kind of like, do you know the myth of Sisyphus? You know what happens to Sisyphus is punished by the gods and he has to push this boulder up the hill, and then that happens every day to him. He pushes the boulder up the hill and it just rolls right back down every day. And yet it's his punishment. He has to wake up and do it. There are different interpretations of the myth of Sisyphus, and Albert Camus had the best. I don't know if Maxine Green talks about it in this book or not. Maybe she does. It's been, but anyways, Albert Camus wrote this book, Myth of Sisyphus. It's a short, it's like an essay, a long essay. You can find a copy anyway. And here's a different interpretation of the myth of Sisyphus. Oh, poor Sisyphus, he has to do this. And isn't that like everyday life where we just do everything over and then everything just falls apart again? Just what's the point and all that? That's not it. What Camus says, yes, this is our punishment in life. We get a boulder and we're pushing it up the hill with optimism that we're going to get it up there and it'll be, you know, our task will be accomplished. On to the next one. And yet, as soon as it gets up there, it rolls back down. Those are the challenges of life. He sees it as a process of life. What Sisyphus embraces in this punishment that he's given, and the punishment being our freedom in this world, right? We're thrown into this world. We're condemned to be free, as Paul Sartre would say. And yet, what do we do with it? Well, we got the boulder. Let's embrace the process. As we're pushing the boulder, this will teach ourselves and others that, hey, this is life. And let's always be optimistic, because there will be a point we get the boulder up there and it will not fall back down.
But what about it being a process though? Won't it always, to a certain degree? Because we can't just like shrug off of our, you know, daily responsibilities and making money, going to work and raising kids. That's the boulder.
That's the boulder. Yeah. So do you accept it and push it, or then what do you do?
We have to, but you're saying do it with optimism because.
No, I'm saying do it with optimism.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Saying
Yeah.
do it with optimism because you're saying because one day it won't roll back down, but I'm saying that it will always roll back down.
Will it?
That's the nature of our lives and getting up and joining the workforce and doing all of these things. We are not free, right? To park the boulder up there.
Well, here's a response that, you know, perhaps I'll just speculate and say, Camus, let's say you presented this question to Albert Camus. And, you know, if you know a little bit about his history, you know, he's this greatest existential writer, wrote, you know, magnificent books like The Stranger, The Fall, etc. He wanted to be a professional soccer player. He didn't want to be an intellectual writer, philosopher, thinker, anything like that. Things didn't work out for him with the professional soccer. So, and then he ended up being a writer that was celebrated during his own time, so justifiably so, and all that. And he always believed in the philosophy of absurdity, part of the existentialist thinking that everything is absurd and we only ascribe meaning to our lives, because at its core, everything that we ascribe meaning to is absurd. And we've seen this in our own lives. As you live life, some things that are important to you one day, something else happens in your life, you realize how absurd it is that you you give so much energy and all of your emotional, physical, and otherwise energy to that thing, and realizing, oh, this is much more important now. Okay. So the boulder is life, and the look at our lives, right? There's ups and downs, there's positives and negatives, there's successes and failures. There are things that we're disappointed in, things that we're so lucky to have, and all the rest of it. All right. And that's pushing the boulder up, because we're always thinking that we're going to get it up there and then it'll be fine. All right. And then something happens in life, it rolls back down. But do we just sort of give up, or do we push it back up? And that's the question that Camus presents. Right? So, we want to be like Sisyphus and just keep pushing it. What else are you gonna do? You got kids, you got life, you have ambitions, you have, will to live, right? We all have will to live. Right? We're hardwired for it, for survival, for living and all that. We want to accomplish things, yet we're aware intellectually that, oh God, the obstacles are enormous. Like we're going up against the behemoth of a system, education system, political system, institution of marriage, getting a job, all kinds of things in life, right? The limitations that we have, we recognize those things as we become adults. As children, we're not quite aware of the limitations and all that. We learn as we live life. So I personally embrace the pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. But I can't expect everyone to say, well, Kashani, you're right, we're just going to follow your lead and we'll just go there, We are in some ways free, even though we're always in chains. What do you think? Sometimes it seems like we're all over the place, and yet we're at just one place when we have these discussions. Nonetheless, when we move away from it and start thinking about what just happened, what did we talk about? Did it really help cultivate anything within us? More often than not, I feel like I learned something new, even if it was just a process and not so much like, details of one specific topic or another. Kind of like Sisyphus. So it's 5 minutes to 5. Anything pressing that you want to talk about? We're coming to the 2-hour time.
I just wanted to add quickly that in 2020, I had the opportunity to work with a number of young organizers in their 20s on a national campaign, and working with Generation Z, and then being a mother of a 16 and 15-year-old. The level of awareness that this generation has, the willingness to put their necks on the line and be action oriented. Any pessimism that I had for the future, it kind of went out the window. Like this, I'll say it, in my BVE vernacular, they're about it. They do not play around. They are very motivated to totally burn the system down and start anew if need be. And these are the generation that will go into the rooms with the legislators and say, we're coming after you.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing them directly do that, and I'm not talking about, low level officials. I'm talking about higher officials. They're ready. They're ready.
That is definitely worth celebrating. You know, just to see, yeah, there's just like zero tolerance for so many things that, you know, previous generations have, you know, just dealt with and accepted because we didn't know what else we were supposed to do. You know, my concern though is that many of them are jumping on to these ideologies or bandwagons without fully understanding the issue. And so part of that, you know, shows up as cancel culture. And but for the most part though, I am seeing definitely so much more interest in understanding these issues. You know, but then there's the trendiness of certain things, you know what I mean? So I think it's, again, it goes back to kind of critical thinking, like as long as that's part of it, and that you know, that it doesn't cause them to be too close-minded so that they're not listening anymore. Because I think that's one of the things that's contributed to so much fear right now around having these conversations and pushing these agendas and doing things, is that we're so afraid to say the wrong thing and get canceled or get ridiculed or get, you know, so I think that the pendulum has really swung here, and I think it's really important and powerful and necessary, actually, that it has. And this generation has brought us there, and it's really important. But I think it needs to soften or balance out a little bit in order to really start putting in these changes that we want to see. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. My kids are astonishing in that way to me. Yeah. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. There's much hope for Gen Z. Huh? I mean, they're seeing, it's an existential moment, more so for them, say, previous generations, because of the climate crises being so imminent, so in your face every day. And like, this is the world you've brought to us, and we are very much involved in contributing to this climate crisis. So it's not something as if God gave it to us, Zeus did it. That's not, we can't blame Zeus for this. You know, 75% of the emissions that are produced worldwide are produced by corporations that do manufacturing work and service work and delivery work and all that. And look at a country like Pakistan, suffering from the floods, and people are homeless, and many people died and so on. And yet only young people are you know, talking about that sort of thing. And many people, it's not even on the radar screen because it's not on the news agenda. It's not in a discussion in the classrooms and that sort of thing, right? So say, for example, the Ukrainian discussion happens in the classroom because it's everywhere, right? And it should, because of what's happening to the Ukrainian people. But what about the Pakistanis? What about the Ethiopians? What about all these people that have been suffering from all these things that we are directly involved with? Yeah. And thank you for acknowledging this, Tanya and Antia, about, you know, young people and having hope for the future, and we're giving them a future that is it's pretty heavy with responsibility, a lot of things that they have to fix, and they are right to be pissed at us. But now we also have a bigger responsibility too, to become their allies. Right. So despite the obstacles, I know it sounds good. Yes. So are there any great notes to close the session? Are there any questions, logistical or otherwise, that you want to ask now? I hope you felt that the time you spent here on a Sunday was well spent. You're not regretting coming to the Zoom session. I certainly enjoyed talking with everyone, as you know, the mind is expanded. So enjoy what's left of your Sunday, and then tomorrow is back to work, right? Okay, Tia has a question. Will we receive an outline for the prospectus? Well, you mean other than the prompt that I've given you on the assignment page? Is that what you're referring to, Tia? Hello?
I
Okay.
think she's typing.
Okay, yes, I will look it over again, right. Okay, just very quickly. Yeah, I mean, the prompt gives you a general idea. I mean, Tanya took a class with me last term, right? And it's pretty much the same approach, right? You give me an idea of what you're going to work on, right? You pick a topic, and then give me an idea of what literature you've looked at, you know, in terms of resources and so forth. The format of it, how you put the prospectus together, is up to you. You could write a couple paragraphs and an outline, or you just do an entire outline. This is what I'm looking at, and these are some of the resources and all that. So then after that, we can have a conversation one-on-one about your work and then move forward. You know, if you've noticed already, you know, I'm big on dialogue because I think that's where we are most effective with our communication. And the written form with guidelines and all of that, those are just augmentations of the work that we'll do together. So by the end of week 4, I expect to have the prospectuses, but if you are not ready, if you're not quite, haven't decided on the topic, just get in touch with me and then, you know, we'll discuss it and it'll work itself out. Hope that was helpful. All right. It's great seeing everybody.
Nice to see everybody.
All right, see you online. And again, another Zoom session, you know, we'll do the same thing. I'll send email to everybody and all that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.